another episode of the Dragonfire podcast. My name is James Lloyd Doolin, and I am joined as always, but this time again, the disembodied voice of Nathan Klembara, a reviewer at the Before We Go blog. And we have a special guest, a repeating guest, one of our very few repeating guests, Moses Ose Utomi, the author of both The Lies of the Ajongo and The Truth of the Aleke, um, which is coming out March 3rd. Am I right?
March 5th.
March 5th.
Yeah. Which should be like today for people listening.
All right.
Because I think that's when we're going to be dropping this episode.
Perfect timing. We planned it just for you, Moses. Well, we're really glad to have you on. How has everything been going? It's been about a year since we talked.
It has been. It's been a busy year. I mean, last year was my first year as a published author, which was wild. I mean, spend your whole life trying to like get to something and you get to it and then it's a year later. That's kind of how time goes.
Yeah.
So it was cool. I mean, Lies of the Ajongo has been doing way better than I expected. Daughters of Oduma has been doing way better than I expected. So it's just been like, it's been a joy, honestly. It's been a joy to enjoy it and connect with people who enjoyed the books and talk with people like you guys. And just kind of, yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah. And you, during the pandemic, if I'm not misremembering, you moved to Hawaii during that time. Is that correct? You're still there, enjoying your time there?
I'm not. I'm back in San Diego.
Okay.
Yeah. Family's in San Diego. So Hawaii was like I'm pretty nomadic. So I tend to not stay in a place for more than like 2 or 3 years. And it was going on 3 years in Hawaii. That's surprising.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that why there's so much traveling in your books?
Yeah, probably.
We're gonna start psychoanalyzing you now.
I know.
Yes.
I know.
By the end, we'll have a diagnosis.
Please let me know. I might need
that. So with this new book, the Truth of the Aleke, is it Aleke?
Yeah, it's words on a page, however you want to pronounce it. I'd say Aleke.
Aleke.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. With this new book coming out, this will be your third book out, and people are starting to kind of get to know you as an author. Who's the person behind that?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm just me. I mean, I have a few things that I like a lot. I'm pretty family oriented. I'm a bit of a homebody. I like to travel a lot. I like to, as in literally go from place to place, but I kind of go from place to place and stay home and read and write and play video games and do martial arts, and that's kind of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I enjoy media. I enjoy consuming media, books, graphic novels, as in fiction, graphic novels, television, music. I'm a big music guy. Yeah, but nothing exciting. I feel kind of boring now that saying it out loud.
Is there any game you've been putting in the hours in?
I took Thursday off because that's when Final Fantasy VII Rebirth comes out. I also have a Reddit AMA, which that comes first. That's more important. But I'll spend the rest of the day playing Rebirth.
Did the AMA come first, or did Final Fantasy come first? Like you just scheduled the AMA on that day so you could take that day off?
Two birds, one stone, right? Why waste the day off?
That's a good answer. So kind of still on the topic of who the author is behind the books, what media made you and made this voice that we're coming to know? Are there any childhood favorites that really stuck with you and kind of led you to this path?
Yeah. I mean, I think I heard a quote from a comedian once who said something like, the best thing about writing is that it's the only job where you get to use everything you know. And I feel like that's definitely true. I mean, everything I've ever consumed or done or place I've been in some way has impacted my voice and the content of my writing. So, I think in particular, if I pick things out, I mean, my life has kind of gone in like phases. I tend to do that where I just really dive into one thing and then I love it and I move on to the next thing. So epic fantasy, when I was like 13ish, I got the Dragonlance Chronicles. That was like my first exposure to the world of like Forgotten Realms D&D style epic fantasy, and so that definitely like set me on a path. I think I read a lot before then. I was one of those kids, but that was like an awakening for me. I've always been a big video game guy. I've always been a martial arts guy. Probably where the fight scenes and things come from. I'm a big anime nerd. Definitely some influence of that in my work. Um, yeah, I consume a lot of music. It doesn't show up as much in the Forever Desert, I don't think, in any real way. But I wrote a soundtrack. I produced the soundtrack for my other books. The songs that I wrote lyrically in the book, I worked with a musician to kind of have them made, and so it's on Spotify if you ever want to go check out those songs for Daughters of Oduma. But yeah, I mean, all of those things played a role. You know, everything I've experienced plays a role. Music, anime, epic fantasy, martial arts, travel, it all shows up.
Very cool. That the producing a soundtrack, what was that like?
For me, it was easy. I just like I made some demos and I sent it out to a much more talented person, and he took care of it. Um, but it was cool to. I mean, I think anytime, especially as a novelist, the whole for me point of being a novelist that you get full creative control to some extent. Like it's you, right? I mean, with the movie, it's the director, but then there's a cinematographer, and then there's the screenwriter, and then there's the principal photographer, and then there's the sound design and the costume team. Whereas with a novel, you're all of those things. And so when it came to music production, I was in the role of like a limited person, right? I wasn't in charge of the whole project, so which is kind of fun. It's kind of nice, I don't necessarily like with my novels. I mean, my editors do a lot of work, and I enjoy that, but yeah, it was cool to like have a vision and have somebody execute it in a way that made sense to both of us. It's not just them like doing exactly what I want. They bring their own creativity. That was cool.
Very cool. So what was the experience of writing this latest book versus writing Lies of the Jungle? And given the distance from that first book, was it easier? Was it harder? What was the difference in experience?
About 100,000 times harder. It was so much harder. It was way harder. Lies, Lies came out as just like it just kind of poured out of my fingertips. Honestly, it came out. It was its own thing from the beginning. It had its own aesthetic, its own voice. I was just kind of a conduit. I went and I did some architecture and a little bit here and there, but honestly, most of the story happened on its own. That was not the case with Truth at all. It was a very deliberate and careful planning venture on my part. I've written more drafts of The Truth of the Aleke than I've written of anything ever, including like short stories. I wrote, I think, 9 or 10 drafts. There is probably more book that was cut out than there is in the final copy. I've never been like that. That's not the kind of writer I typically am. So
Yeah.
it was a totally new process. I loved it for what it was, the process. As a writer, you want to flex your muscles, you want to experience different things, and that was a totally different experience. I loved it for what it was, but it was much more challenging.
And when you say that the Lies of the Jungle came out with its own kind of thing, its own kind of voice, it's very apparent. These, for anybody who's getting into these books, they're not like direct sequels. They feel like they have a different voice. It's still very much you, but actually, as I was reading more and more of the Truth, it felt like The Lies of the Jungle was a fable that existed in the world of the Truth. And so, like, it really informed everything that was going on, almost like a history, a spoken history. But it didn't feel like what am I saying? I guess the POV was much more distant in Lies and much closer in Truth. Why was that the original intent? Why did you choose that route? I liked it a lot, but
Yeah.
I'm interested in what the thought process was.
So that'll become more clear in the third book when all this stuff gets reconciled. But I mean, a lot of it was just, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, which is why I love talking to you guys. Because you guys all the little things I do that I feel like is a waste of time and nobody's going to see. And if anybody does see it, they'll be annoyed by it. You guys see it and you appreciate it. And it feels amazing. Yeah, I mean, they're different stories, right? Tutu's story is, I mean, it's a told story. Tutu's story is being told. Ose's story is being lived. And that was the intent, for it to feel different, where, and I, Tutu's story is very simple, and very like archetypal. OC is a bit more complicated, and I wanted to recontextualize the events of Tutu and also show like the power of storytelling and mythology. And I might have said to you guys the last interview a year ago, but like I think there's this like patronizing look at mythology, where there's this inherent like mythology, it's something of the past, it's not to be taken or treated seriously, it's just kind of like stuff you can talk about. Like, I know who Poseidon is. It's just kind of like a fun factoid thing. It doesn't, but like mythology is kind of the end result of all important things, right? Like, eventually 50,000 years from now, who knows how the current religions that we're fighting over and dying over will be discussed, right? It'll be somebody else's mythology. And so I don't know if people fought and died over Poseidon specifically. I'm not a master of Greek mythology, but you know what I mean? But there was a time when presumably people really believed this stuff, and it was really important to them. And so I wanted to take what felt very important to the reader, hopefully, which was Tutu's story, and turn it into like, yeah, it's mythology. It's starting to become mythologized, but I think that would only work if we're really living in OC's story. If the OC story is also kind of that same distant, fable-like tone, I don't think the effect comes across.
Gotcha.
Yeah. At what point, while you were planning and writing The Lies of the Ajungo, did you know that you wanted to write a book like Truth, or even the third book that you haven't written yet? Was that always the plan, or did it kind of emerge through the writing?
A bit of both. I knew I wanted to have two more books 500 years apart. I knew I wanted to tell a kind of sweeping story and play with ideas of history and oral tradition and written tradition eventually, which we'll get to book 3, and like other things. And so that was always the goal. I didn't fully know Truth would feel the way it felt until I sat down to write it. Part of it came out as like, I went through so many drafts. Oh my gosh. Part of it came out as just like honestly, a lot of pressure. Like, Lies was written in the lab of my mind. There was nobody asking for it. It was my debut. So nobody in the world knew it existed except for like my 4 friends in my writing group. Nobody was asking for it. Nobody cared about it. And so when people did start to care about it, and I felt a ton of pressure to like deliver something that could mean something to those same people, as a sequel. And so initially it was just jam packed full of plot and events and characters and names, and then every weapon had a name, and it was so like encumbered in a way, and that it was just, I was like, I think some people like Lies because I want to make it more fantasy, because I read some reviews and they're like, oh, this doesn't feel like a traditional fantasy. It's like, oh, okay, I'll make you happy. And then other people are like, well, I like that it was a fable. Oh, okay, I'll try to make you happy. And it was just a lot. So it felt different from the beginning, and some of that was the pressure. And eventually I had to like peel back of like, well, independent of the world around me, like, what is the purpose of this story? How do I want it to feel? And I just I don't think it didn't feel to me the same in Tutu's story, so I couldn't render it that same way.
Yeah. So what is the third book going to be called? Like the non-committal statement of?
I can't announce it yet because I think I can. I don't know how these things work. I think I can't announce it, but
okay.
Yeah, Tor will announce it. But you're on the right track.
And you said it when you were just talking now. Truth is set 500 years after the events of Lies.
Yeah.
What made you want to do this large time gap to explore the forever desert? And what did the time gap allow you to do as an author that you wouldn't have had if it was just 20 years later?
Yeah. I think so. There are points in Truth. I guess people will be hearing this without having read it, but I think one of the coolest things about experiencing serialized storytelling is the opportunity for recontextualization. Of course, you can do it in like contained storytelling. You can do it in films if you're very good and clever and you have enough time. But I find recontextualization to be a deeply satisfying feeling when you, and I think it mirrors how it feels in life. You know, you grow up in your childhood home, you sleep in a specific race car bed or whatever, and it means something to you. And then you come back 30 years later when you're a full adult, and maybe even by now you have kids or you've been through a lot, and you see that same bed. The bed hasn't changed, right? But you have changed in a way that now the bed has a new meaning. And I think that's a powerful feeling. And so I wanted to evoke that. And I think if I was just doing it with maybe just Tutu in his specific story, I think 20 to 50 years could have been enough. But I wanted to do it with not just Tutu, but the Ajungo and how water works in this world and what the desert and all these other things I wanted to include. So that felt like I need to go much further. If I want to start looking at, it didn't make it into the final draft necessarily, like linguistic changes or ecological changes. You know, some of these things need a lot of time, especially when, I can say this, like in the second book, there's no walls around the city.
Mm-hmm.
That is not the case at the end of the first book. So yeah, I really want to look at like, yeah, how much can change in 500 years? I mean, America's not even 500 years old yet, you know, like in the United States at least. So yeah, a lot can change. And I was just like, I kind of have this infinite sandbox, right? I mean, if that much can change in 500 years, I can do anything. And yet we still get the power of recontextualization where if I do anything that's the same, I think you'll see, I'm sure you notice it, like some lines are repeated or some places are repeated. You start to get that feeling of recontextualization that I really wanted to accomplish.
Yeah. And there are definitely some pullbacks to the fable style where you'll hear people quoting certain kinds of phrases or things like that that feel lived in like mythology, like the Aleke is clever and all those kinds of lines. There is one line about something about the absence of water in the forever desert or something like that. I can't remember the line specifically. But there do feel like there are callbacks at different points. Um, how do you keep yourself from overindulging in that?
Good question. I mean, it's kind of like anything else in writing, like introducing a new character. How do you not describe every detail of their face? It's like you just give enough. You give enough to evoke the feeling in the reader. It is an exercise in restraint sometimes, but I think you just kind of follow your writerly instinct. Like, okay, this is what they need to get the point.
Yeah, I also have to just appreciate too your restraint in only separating the books by 500 years. I feel like there's a trend in epic fantasy to be like, this happened 12,000 years later,
Right, yeah.
and nothing's really changed. And I thought it was really interesting to see that, yeah, a lot can change in just the short amount of time and really like demonstrating that.
Thanks, yeah. And I guess I can say this. It's barely hinted at in the book. You'd have to really fine tooth comb, but it actually hasn't been 500 years. That's kind of the time they go by because it sounds nice, but it's probably close to like 300 or 350.
Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah. We didn't study enough.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Honestly, I have so many drafts of that book in my brain that I actually don't know if it ended up in the if it is, it's super opaque.
So in both books, you follow a young protagonist as you kind of explore the forever desert. There's a couple of interesting things I think with young protagonists. I've explored young protagonists in my book too, and it's interesting how closely people associate young protagonists with YA or middle grade or something like that. And when you're writing adult fantasy, which this 100% is, how do you like, I guess, what are the necessary pieces to make that still feel like it's a lived-in adult fantasy when you're following somebody who's I think 16 years old?
Yeah, 17. I mean, I think some of this is like, how does one view adulthood versus childhood? And I think every culture views that a little differently. I think it's a very gradual spectrum. I think this idea that there's like a hard line between adulthood and childhood is a bit, I don't believe that to be true. I remember being 10 years old specifically and thinking, I'm pretty adult by now. Mind you, I've been through nothing. All I did was go to recess and hang out with my friends and drink chocolate milk. But I remember thinking like, I have started my life. Like this is what life is like. I have friends. I have a job at the school. I have extracurriculars. Like, what part of life have I not accessed? And so, I think some of it is just that. I mean, young people don't know how young they are. If they did, they'd be old and wise. You know, like most of us don't realize how young we are until we're old, and we realize, oh man, even when I was 40, I had 50 years ahead of me. You know, and so I think OC doesn't really know he's young. You know, he thinks he doesn't have some experiences, but he doesn't equate that with being immature or young. He's very immature, but he doesn't think of himself that way. You know, he's living his life, and so I think even Daughters of Oduma, it's a YA novel, and I kind of follow the same thing. Some of those girls are like 7. Like, you know, I remember being 7. You don't think you're 7, you know, you're just a person. You're you, you know, and I try to make that apparent in all my characters. They don't view them, whether they're the villain, they don't view themselves that way. Like, you know, they kind of have their own sense of self.
Yeah, they don't view their truths as silly or less worthwhile because they're young. They view them as true as we view our own truths. Yeah.
And I don't view young people's truths as like, I remember thinking this once, like, I have a new baby niece and I get to hang out with her a lot. And thinking like how often kids cry. Sometimes they're just getting attention or making noise, but they're communicating, but sometimes they're stressed. I think like, yeah, if I'd never experienced pain before, like what does an itch feel like?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's probably maddening. And so like the but that doesn't mean it's not in the same way that as an adult, I mean, my life has been privileged in ways that many other people's haven't. There are people who are growing up in slums, missing limbs, in horrible corruption. But if they were to look at my life and be like, oh, he has it easy because he didn't grow up like that's just a failure of empathy. You know, we all have it hard, whether we're adults or children or poor or less poor, you know, we're all going through things. And so I don't try to strip that from my characters at any age.
Right. Yeah. So I think if you look at a lot of fantasy right now, there's a lot of discussion going on with themes around colonialism, politics, and power. What kind of advice do you have for authors who are looking to write those kinds of stories, who are looking to talk about those kinds of themes? And do you have any really good examples of stories that do it really well?
I don't have any advice. I'm hesitant to give advice on like things like that. Writing mechanics, maybe, but when it comes to like what you want your story to say, it's very much up to the author. But I think the root of all writing is empathy. And so I will say for me, writing about colonialism is, even to the veiled extent, maybe I do it here. I try to be aware of the fact that I'm complicit in it. As we're giving this interview, I don't want to get too political, but like an airman just self-immolated outside the Israeli embassy. So, because he said he couldn't partake in a genocide. What am I doing? You know what I mean? Like before I go and like, I have to be careful in my fiction to see things for me, not for every author. Every author is doing something different. See things from as many angles as possible. I think C.L. Clarke in The Unbroken does a very good job of portraying what it means to be complicit in atrocity, maybe not atrocity, complicit in the oppression of others, in the many ways that that can exist, whether it's because our laptops are made of certain things that require children to sacrifice their limbs and lives mining, or because you fall in love with the emperor of your, you know, the opposing power. So it's very complicated, and every story is different. You're whoever the author is, tell it how you feel it, you know, it makes sense to you. But for me, these things are extremely complex, and I just try to never ever try to simplify them.
Yeah. I think that can be hard when often I think people are looking for simple answers or simple messages. And I think that's one of the things I appreciate about your work that I've read is you don't ever take time to step on the soapbox and preach the message. The message lives within your story, it lives within your characters, but I don't think you step out of narration ever to really like, by the way, this is the point I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And I think that in a lot of our media, it is kind of stepping back to try to remember to wave the white flag and saying, by the way, this is the point I'm trying to make. Um, have you found it a difficult kind of path to walk when you're talking about nuance and empathy, and you're trying to talk about difficult themes without necessarily being extremely explicit?
I mean, empathy is hard, like real empathy. You know what I mean? Like, as in learning to love the people you hate. It's almost a contradiction in terms. Like, it's very difficult. I don't pretend to achieve it all the time, but um, in terms of like not being overly explicit with what I think, that's actually that part comes pretty easy. Partially because I don't know what I think, to be honest. I mean, these things are very complex, and I don't have a PhD in anything, so like I don't want to pretend like I don't know the first thing about colonialism. If we're being honest, I know what it feels like to be a first generation of a colonized country, but I'm not a historian in colonialism. I'm not a scholar. So it's not hard for me to like not come down conclusively on one side or the other. Um, and also I think that as I understand storytelling, I'm very driven by I write because I need to think. Writing helps me think, it helps me work through things. And so if I knew the answer, I wouldn't need to write about it. I would just go about my life thinking it. Whereas writing allows me to question and grapple, and it put a character who's on one side of the debate and a character on the other side of the debate, and see how they live and see how they interact, and kind of simulate internal tension on the page. Yeah, so even now I don't know. I've talked to people about what Tutu did at the end of the first book, and I've been in some interviews where they're like, "I'm so glad he did that. Burn it all down. F the Ajingo," and I'm like, "Yeah." And I've been to other people where they're like, that was kind of an immature decision. You should have partnered with other people and tried to build a more lasting piece. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. He's 13, an idiot. And they're both, I think both those things are true. I have no reason to fall on one side of that or the other.
Yeah. So you've mentioned it a little bit, but can you give us a little hint about what's coming next for the Forever Desert? Do you have like a publication date or targeted date or anything for that?
So the plan is summer 2025. I can give that general time frame. More info will be coming eventually. But I think, like, again, we're taking another 500-year leap. And so I think what I can say is that we've seen what Tutu looks like, what his story looks like after 100 years. And now we're going to look at what it looks like after 1,000 years. And now Ose's story is 500 years old. And we get to see kind of where that story sits in the narrative, the larger narrative of the Forever Desert, and who's heard that story, who hasn't, how that impacts those people and what they think of it. So, yeah, like I'm so excited. Book 3 is. I'm in disbelief that I was allowed to write these books from the beginning. I was like, Lies of the Jingo, it's good. I like it. I'm glad other people like it. Book 2, I was like, I'm pretty sure my career ends here. I don't think anyone will like this. In book 3, the fact that I'm allowed to write it is the greatest present I've ever received. I'm so excited for people to read it and to understand kind of what I was going for from the beginning of this project.
Is that the end of the Forever Desert that we're going to be seeing, or is that, a jumping off point?
Yes. Yeah. It's the end of this trilogy of the Forever Desert. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Before we kind of switch over and follow into Dragonfire a little bit, what books are you reading? What do you want to tell our audience to like pick up after, of course, picking up your new book?
There's so many good books in this world. So I'm reading a few. That's where I'm at in my life. I read several books at a quarter of the pace I used to read them. Andrea Stewart, The Bone Shard Daughter. If you haven't read that, read it. In the Shadow of the Fall, it has not out yet. It's by Toby Ogundiran. It's coming out, I think later this year, August or so this year. Check that out. African-inspired fantasy novella from tordotcom. I just finished A Necessary Chaos by Brent Lambert from Neon Hemlock Press. That's a novella.
Mhm.
I am reading others, like I have George Saunders' book. I have Ocean Blonde. I'm just like diving in and out of a million things. I'm reading short stories. But yeah, those three, the two novellas and Andrea Stewart, I'd say those are my main recommendations right
I loved the Bone Shard Daughter. I need to get into the rest of the trilogy. And I've been trying to convince Nathan to come along with me.
now.
Yeah, it's been
It's
on my PR for so long. I just need to commit and get to it.
I love novels or stories too that are aware of and effectively use their momentum. And I think that book is a good example of the beginning is setting up pieces and it just starts moving and moving and churning. I like it a lot.
Well, let's transition on over to Dragonfire.
Yeah, let's do it. So it's time for our Dragonfire segment where we do a quick rundown of 6 topics. Because my laptop is out of commission, we don't have the timer again, but we'll see what we can do. Last time without a timer, we went way over, but we'll try to keep it reined in. So for our first question, what character would you remove to improve a story, whether it's a book, TV show, movie? Who are you nixing? James, do you want to go first?
Yeah, when I thought about it, this question is actually pretty easy because there's a movie that I pretty much love the whole way through, except this very ending, just one joke that throws it all off for me, and that is Kingsman. There's a character of Princess Tilde who is like the one woman who stands up for herself the whole movie, and then her whole character arc leads to a anal sex joke. And I'm like, that is unnecessary. Take it out. Like it's a very stylized spy movie and all of that's great. And then to just undercut the one woman who's like had a say throughout the whole movie to say like I think the joke is something like if you go save the world, you can put it anywhere. I'm like, why was that necessary? It ruins the movie for me.
Nice. Yeah.
Good one. Wait, you would take out the character?
I take out the character because that's all she's there for.
She's just there to ruin the movie. All right, Moses, you got an answer?
I'm gonna cheat because I don't want to take a character out of anything important. There's a comic strip on the internet called Garfield minus Garfield, where they just kind of Photoshop Garfield out of the Garfield comics, and it just looks like John going insane. So that's my rec. Take Garfield out, and you get a very hilarious and dark story of one man's descent into madness.
Cool. I had never seen that.
Fantastic.
Now I need to look that up.
Yeah.
Nathan, what do you got?
So I chose Quentin Coldwater from The Magicians.
Oh man.
Even though he's the main character, he's so mopey. Yeah. And I would definitely say book Quentin needs to go. In the TV show, we can get rid of Quentin, but I think it'd be better to get rid of Alice because I think she's more annoying in the show than even Quentin is. But I think the two of them just drag the whole thing down. And when the show especially decides to not focus on them anymore, it's much better.
I love that series. Lev Grossman is great. That's a good choice.
Yeah.
All right. Number 2, and this was inspired by the adaptation of The Last Airbender coming out. So with the onslaught of adaptations, can you rank the following elements by importance when creating an adaptation? There's A, themes, B, character arcs, C, character details, D, plot points, E, setting, F, tone. Nathan, what do you think?
Okay. So my cheat answer is that I don't necessarily think any of these are that important. I think that they're adaptations for a reason, not translations. And I think you can go like balls to the wall if you want. I think like 2004 Battlestar Galactica shows that like you can just do whatever you want and kind of nix everything, and it's great. But if I am staying with the question, then themes I think are definitely the most important. I think you can change everything else, but as long as the heart and the core of the property or the IP is intact. And I think related to that then would be character arcs, because I think a lot of the times character arcs are related to themes. And I think like C through F, like character details, plot point, setting, and tone, like for me, I think they're all the same. Like I think you can change up as much as you want. And I don't think it matters, because again, like people always are looking for this like one-to-one like translation. And I just don't think it works that way when you're moving from like books to TV shows or TV shows to movies or anywhere else. So I think the rest of them just kind of like you can change as much as you want, and I'm okay with it as long as it's still good. Like the new Last Airbender show, like the problem is that like there's just like problems with the writing and the acting, and it has nothing to do with it being an adaptation. It's just like you just watch that show and you can just tell the actors are acting, and it annoys me so much.
Yeah, I didn't make it past the first episode. Well, I finished the first episode. I don't think I'll be continuing. Um, but for me, it's because I think they got the themes wrong. I think you're right. You can adapt anything any way and go really out there with it. But I think if you're trying to tell the same story, like not just in the same world, you're trying to tell the same story, then you need to understand the heart of the themes. What is this story trying to say? You need to understand the heart of the characters, and that's those character arcs. What are these characters about, and how do they grow? And I think from what I've seen and what I've heard, Avatar adaptation completely doesn't understand the themes or the characters. Um, like removing Aang's like basically active choice that led to 100 years of war by running away from his problems, they turned that into something else. And so no longer is it about him having to deal with the fact that he, like his choices led to a lot of suffering and he has to understand that. Now that's all kind of written away because they don't understand that that's part of his character. Everything else I agree can kind of go. I put setting. I like to see a similar setting. I like to see what you can do with that setting. Tone after that, character details. Last thing is plot points. I don't care if the plot points look the same. You can write a completely different plot as long as it understands the same themes and characters.
This question, first of all, I will say I haven't watched Avatar yet. I know somebody who writes on it, so it's perfect. It's a great show. You're complaining. You're all wrong. You're all wrong. It's perfect.
Oh, sorry. Did not know that.
No, we're not besties. We're Twitter friends.
Okay.
So I will cheat here because cheating is necessary, and I will say G for genre. And I will argue that every story is its own genre. Obviously, there's some overlap, but I would argue that most stories, especially like kind of vaunted, celebrated, timeless stories, are that way because they're doing something unique with genre and kind of occupying a very specific space. And I think that's the most important thing. There is a YouTube channel which is, in my opinion, the best storytelling YouTube channel on YouTube. It only has like 1,000 subscribers. Nobody is aware of it. It's called Narrative Arcade. It's this screenwriter guy who analyzes video games, mainly video games, but also other things, through the perspective of like screenwriting, storytelling. And he's super technical, and he's read hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pages of screenwriting, storytelling, plotting stuff, and he really dissects these things. And he took apart Halo and why Halo works. And he argues that Halo works so well because it creates its own genre. And I'll be very quick with this, but he says he calls it a paleo-cosmic epic. That's the genre he thinks Halo occupies. He mentions that perhaps Warhammer 40K also kind of sits in this genre. But he says an important part of the genre, for example, he like breaks it down very systematically into like what makes a paleo-cosmic epic. And the first thing is techno-mysticism, kind of rooted in the idea that like any sufficiently advanced science is indistinguishable from magic. And he gives this example of Halo. If you guys played Halo or are familiar with the Halo world, he gives an example I thought is brilliant and is how I'm going to think about storytelling all the time from now on. He says, imagine you're like a 14th century peasant. You live on a farm, you work on a farm. The biggest building you've maybe seen is a stable. And then one day you travel to Rome or Paris and you go to a cathedral. And it's a cathedral that is 500 years old. The person who designed it is dead. The first people who built it are dead. It has a piece of art on the ceiling that's bigger than your entire village. It has columns that are taller than anything you've ever seen. And the sound echoes in a way that you've never heard echoing sound because you live on a farm. And you walk into that. And he says, that's the feeling Halo evokes. It's a religious experience created entirely by technology. There's nothing mystical about cathedrals. It's just brick. And I thought, this guy really understands Halo. I had never thought of Halo that way. And I think that is the most important approach to understanding any story before you adapt it, is to really understand it in a essential and unique way. What genre is this thing? What genre is Avatar? It's not like just in the action adventure fantasy. There's a lot of action adventure fantasy. Like, what makes Avatar Avatar? That's my cheat, because anything else I can't do. Like, I thought about setting. I was like, yeah, what if you set Dune in like Minneapolis? It's not Dune, right? And even though I don't think setting's important. And then what if you like, like you took The Last of Us, but you changed all the plot points. Instead of going across the country, they're stuck in a, it's like it changes. So depends on the story. Figure out the story, then adapt it from there. Sorry, I cheated.
I am playing with two cheaters.
Yeah, I guess I'd also say I would rank setting a little bit higher, I guess, than I first said it, especially if you compare like the new Avatar Netflix adaptation to the M. Night Shyamalan film, where like it was essentially whitewashed. And I think that's where like setting actually does matter, when it's set in a particular cultural milieu.
Unless the writer friend of yours wrote on that last adaptation, then that was perfect. M. Night Shyamalan did
that
amazing.
one was also perfect. Yeah.
All right. So for our next question, inspired by Moses's books, what is the best use of a time jump in storytelling? And I think this question, I wrote it because I think so often time jumps, if they're not automatically built into a story, can often feel like a desperate attempt to save a story. Sure. So who has done it well? So I don't know. Does anybody have a good answer?
I only realized this when you guys asked it, but probably my favorite book of all time is The Once and Future King by T.H. White. That book has time jumps. I didn't realize. I mean, I knew it when I read it, but I had forgotten that was an important aspect of it. It's about King Arthur, and he jumped through 4 different parts of his life, from when he's a child to when he's an adolescent to when he's an adult, a bit older. And the book is gorgeous. I'd argue it's flawless. And I think so much of the heft of it comes from the fact that you're seeing, again, kind of the recontextualization. I'm realizing now how much of my writing is based on that book. I didn't realize. But yeah, it recontextualizes everything. When you see what you knew to be a young boy, and you know who he is at his heart, and how much struggle he's going through internally, and how he's still learning about the world, and you see him thrust into a position of authority and fame to some extent. And now he's a grown man, but you still see the young boy. The character internally hasn't changed. It's just the way the world operates around him has changed. And then you see that at different stages in his life. It's gorgeously done, and it's a perfect book, and everybody should read it.
Well, now I need to pick up a copy.
Okay.
I think there are two different, and of course, except for the Forever Desert, we're taking that off the list. Okay. I think there are two different reasons for a time jump, and that is, one, seeing characters in a different setting, and two, or experiencing the changing of our setting, or experiencing the changing of our characters. And so I think one that does it really cool was Fringe was given one last season to kind of make it work, and they did this really interesting time jump. I don't think everybody loves it, but I really love what they did with this time jump to wrap up these external stories that were happening in a procedural, then became the forefront as everybody jumped ahead by, I forget, it was like 50 years or something like that. And so the characters were actually, I think, frozen in amber or something. And so they ended up remaining the same. but the setting completely changed around them, which had this really interesting thing going on. And then in terms of seeing characters aging, I really loved what Jade Legacy did with that.
Hmm.
Seeing Hilo just gradually grow into this older man was really awe-inspiring, because you get to see what it looks like when a character really ages well. Instead of just being the same person or someone completely different, there's some kind of mixture of this person that is changed, but that core still remains, even if it's shifted to one direction or another. I think Fonda Lee just did such a brilliant job with that time jump.
Agreed.
Yeah, Jade Legacy was my answer for this one too. I think we've talked about this on the podcast before, but just her ability to show how individuals, but also whole families and kin networks change over a lifespan, and over the generations was just impeccable to me. And yeah, and I think that was so important to how that last book resonated.
Have you guys interviewed her?
We,
No.
Please do, and just talk about Jade Legacy for 4 hours. Like, I would really love to see you guys. I mean, you guys really, you guys are very good at what you do, and that book is worthy of like a long form discussion. It's so good.
yeah, we had an episode where we just kind of like geeked out about that whole trilogy for an hour and a half. That was one of our longest episodes
Yeah.
with Delilah, right?
Yeah,
it was like
we invited another indie author on, and we just kind of geeked out about this book, this
Nice.
trilogy. I actually thought you were going to bring up this, the Green Boat Saga, Nathan. I thought you were going to bring it up for number one, because I know you don't think Barrow serves any purpose.
oh
I
yeah,
thought
yeah,
about that.
I mean, I had thought about it. I thought about it, but then I remembered how much I hate Quentin Coldwater. And I feel like Barrow is like a small enough part of that book where it doesn't bother me versus being the main character.
Sure. All right, so we're gonna play another character movement thing, and we're gonna take one character from any IP and drop them into another world of another IP to make an awesome story. Nathan, what do you think?
Okay. I don't know. Have you either of you seen the K-drama Moving? It's on Hulu or Disney
Oh,
Plus. It's essentially a superhero property, but like a K-drama, where it's essentially North Korea and South Korea both forming superhero teams to go after each other. It's really, really
okay.
good. It's Hulu in the US and I think Disney Plus outside the US. But I want to drop those characters into like the MCU because I think they would save the MCU because the characters in Moving are so good, and it's this intergenerational story, and everything is like super nuanced, and not like some people are good and some people are not so good, and there's morally gray in the middle, and not everybody's just a quit machine. And I think that would inject the MCU with some actual characters that I want to like actually see, and it would put those characters with a good budget to make their superhero powers look even cooler, because you can tell that this K-drama didn't have the biggest budget, but it is good and I highly recommend it. It's 20 episodes, and everybody should watch it if you're looking for something that is a little deeper than like the Marvel stuff, but not so cynical like The Boys or Invincible. It kind of fits in the middle.
Moses, what do you think?
I mean, I had no answer to this until Nathan gave us a brilliant answer. I'm going to check out that show. That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
I would put Homelander from The Boys in the world of Dragon Ball Z, because I was just thinking of like, I think power scaling is very funny. Like, I think
Yeah.
of like some of my favorite, like Randall Thor is uber powerful. You throw him into any world, he's a beast. But I was like, Dragon Ball Z is like the anime equivalent of Wheel of Time, where the power is just off the charts. And Homelander, being a powerful sociopath, would be like middling in Dragon Ball Z world. He'd be like weaker than Krillin, most likely, even like early arc Krillin. And so seeing him want to murder everybody and literally be unable to, like, he's just kind of an average guy compared to Goku in the squad, would be like sitcom worthy. I'd love it.
I went humorous as well. I want to see Archer dropped in the world of Dune. Because I like the first Dune movie. I haven't seen the second Dune movie. I can't stand the book. I think it was just long and middling, and but I want to see what Archer would do in that world, because I think everybody takes themselves too seriously in that
Yeah,
world,
yeah.
and Archer would just take the piss, and it would be great.
I think that would be even great because I just saw an interview with Denis Villeneuve today that he just hates dialogue.
Really?
And so you're just giving, yeah, he was like, dialogue is for books and TV shows, and like movies are supposed to be visual. And so I think by putting a character whose whole thing is
It's
like
bad.
just talking,
Yeah, that would be great.
like his
I
head
want to
is
see
like
Archer
spinning.
riding one of the sandworms.
All right. So our next one is does anybody have a book that they initially DNF'd and then gave a shot to, ended up really loving, or a book that they've DNF'd and hope to one day give a second shot to? Or are you just like flat out like live life, no regrets?
I didn't start DNFing books until like the last few years. I would read books, and everything I hated, I would plow through. So it's a new thing for me. There aren't in the books I DNF, I don't ever want. I mean, when I did read the Once and Future King, it took me like 6 months. Like I would start, put it down, start, put it down. Same with Wheel of Time. First time I picked it up, I wasn't into it, put it back down, picked it up maybe like a year later, and then read through the whole 50 books of the series. Yeah, I don't regret any books that I didn't finish.
See, I just started DNFing as well. And only because Nathan keeps on bringing it up, I feel like I have to try the Mad Ship again. I
Oh yeah.
love I love Robin Hobb. I
Yeah,
love the first trilogy, and I love the Fool's Errand trilogy. I never remember her titles. Um, but the Mad Ship trilogy, the Magic Ship trilogy, I DNF'd the second book because I didn't like any of the characters.
yeah.
So maybe it was just a time in my life where I couldn't connect with any of them, but maybe I need to give it a second shot because Nathan keeps on telling me it's better than the others.
It's
Yeah. They're also
really
all likable at the beginning. They
mm,
are really all unlikable at the beginning.
because Robin Hobb is so good.
Yeah.
Like it's got to be worth something. Yeah.
And the writing's great. I just like either I didn't care about characters or I disliked them.
Hmm. Yeah, because that's the trilogy with like Kyle.
Yeah. Kyle's a dick.
Yeah.
I should just put
uh
that on a t-shirt and sell it.
yeah, with no context.
No context at all.
Yeah, so for me, it's a recent one was the Midnight Kingdom by Tara Sim, which is the second book in the Dark Gods trilogy. I think I got all that right. And I think because I wrote a review of this book, and my review pretty much says that like this book does everything that I hate in epic fantasy, and yet I still ended up loving it. And I think the first time I was reading it, I was just got bogged down in the fact that like it's like all over the place. It sprawls to like an absurd degree. Um, every character is now in their own universe, doing their own storyline, barely even connecting. And I think I just wasn't in the right headspace for that. And then when I came back to it, mostly because it was sitting on my NetGalley account and like bringing down my NetGalley score for reviewing books. I was like, okay, I now know what I'm going into again, and I know that it's going to do these things. And once I just kind of got over that with the second attempt, I ended up finding it a whole heck of a lot of fun, and I just like raced through the whole thing. So I think that one for me, I just needed to like go in with the right expectations.
Yeah, it's a good one too.
So our last question in this definitely long dragon fire that needs a timer. Um, are books ever justified to be 600 plus pages long? Moses, as somebody who has written two and is about to come out with a third novella next year. Do you need 600 pages?
It depends on what you're going for. I know that's like a cop out, but that's the answer to everything in this wretched life of ours. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's really almost ever necessary. I think I'd say 90% of books that are over 600 pages don't need to be. However, there is something about sitting in a book for a long time, no matter your reading pace, that has a different effect. And so, I can maybe see it justified under that. And especially the older I get. As a kid, I loved them. All I read was like door stoppers. As an adult, I don't have as much time, so I rarely read books over like 400 pages now, even. And I'm just like, I'm loving all these. I don't feel like I'm missing out on this whole realm of literature. So unless you're doing something very, very specific with the effects of time on the human mind.
Nathan?
Yeah, I agree that like if you asked me this 10 years ago, I'd be like, of course they need to be more than 600 pages long. But today, yeah, every time I find a big doorstopper, all I can keep thinking of is this could have been a lot shorter. And I wonder how much of that is changes in trends in the publishing industry where like I find that the big 6, 7, 800 page fantasy books, especially in traditional publishing right now, like they're still paced like 350 page, 400 page books. And so it's not like you just get to like dwell and like spend a lot of time in this world and with these characters. It's not like The Eye of the World where the first 200 pages is them just kind of hanging out, getting ready for a festival. Like, but it's like go, 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 go. But it just makes it feel like it's spinning in circles and getting overly convoluted and just chasing after MacGuffins for no reason. And I kind of feel like it's that modern sense of what publishers want doesn't fit well with the big door stoppers anymore, like unlike it did in like say the 1980s and 1990s.
Good point.
Yeah. I have a middling of the road answer kind of as well. I think we know the titles of the books that deserve the page counts. Like they sift their way to the top pretty easily, and they're few and far between. And you can name them right now. Like we just talked about Jade Legacy. It definitely needed its page count. It was doing so much. But the amount of books that are doing that much work in their page counts, they're so few.
Yeah.
And so like Moses, when I was reading like The Truth of the Aleke, I read certain sections and like, okay, there was a time jump there. If this was a novel, that would be expanded, and I don't know what would have been added.
Yeah.
Like there would have been something in there would have been character or something in there, but it wasn't necessary.
Right.
And so I think you can see those points in books where you could expand here, not necessary. And for most books that are over 600 pages, you go, this whole this chapter, this 100 pages,
Whole
not
character
necessary.
arc. Yeah.
So yeah, it's the exceptions that prove the rule. So I guess my answer is no with exceptions.
Good answer. Yeah, I think 600-page books should be like 3-hour movies. Sometimes, but almost never.
Yeah. Yeah. And only in the hands of really qualified people.
Just Christopher Nolan and like 3 other people. Everyone else needs to
All right. We have reached the end of Dragonfire. Moses, I want to hand it to you for a second. Do you want to kind of tell people where to find you, tell people where to get your books, do any plug-in?
I hate plugging. I need to get better at those, so this is good practice. Yeah, I'm on at MosesOse Utomi.com. It's my website. You could find pretty much everything you need to know about me there. But I'm much more active on social media. Instagram, to less extent Twitter. I'm on Blue Sky now. I'm trying TikTok. Don't hold me to anything. You can find me on all those places. Please follow. And just pick up The Truth of the Aleke if you liked Lies of the Ajingo. Also, if you didn't like it, I think the books are different enough that like it's a different experience, and I'm so excited for it. I'm so excited for it. I'm so excited for it. Nathan, thank you for your review. It was so kind and so thorough and intelligent. And yeah, I hope everyone reads it and everyone picks it up based on your review and also because they like it.
Thank you so much for joining us, Moses. It's a pleasure having you on for a second time. I hope that next time around you'll have us again.
Please, yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, we'd love to continue the conversation and see what happens in, the non-committal statement of whatever people.
The vaguely African words.
That start with an
A. And thank you everybody who listened to this episode and are meandering through Dragonfire. We appreciate you for listening. All of the necessary information will be in the liner notes for this episode, regardless of what platform you're listening on. Join us again every other Tuesday, we drop another episode. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.